Hey, today we're going to be building a block-based or Gutenberg WordPress theme. We're going to be using custom elements and custom post types to build out our theme and plan and implement all the different features we're going to need to make that happen. So Gutenberg is the new editor for WordPress, and it's an all-visual editor allowing you to use custom blocks to implement different design styles or different elements to your pages and be able to reuse those throughout your website without having to go too deep into coding or having to hire in a new designer or a new developer to accomplish that for you. So what we're going to be doing today is starting just from even the wireframing and sketching things out, building everything up in code, and then from there we're actually going to be implementing the plugins and different elements on the pages to show how that's all going to work. I've mocked up a small example page with literally nothing installed but a plugin I've created for the sidebar so that we can actually add headers and footers as block elements from their own custom post type called layouts. So what I'm going to do right now is just head right into drawing everything out and wireframing it out so that we can see how it's all going to break down and get our head wrapped around how we're going to code everything out. So the first thing that we have to be aware of here, because it's a block-based theme, is how all of our different assets are going to load. So with this block-based theme, we still have to be aware of basically how the entire page is laid out, but also how the code is going to need to be structured. So if we take our page here like this, break it down into a couple elements, we've got our header and our footer. So there's also two calls that are associated with your header and footer. So you have your WP footer, and then also up here we have our WP head. So in the WP head, we're going to have a few things in there. So we have link tags in there, you have some scripts that are required for the page, and then we'll also have our metadata in there. Of course, there's a few other things, but those are the primary things that are going to be in your header. Then in your footer, it's primarily going to be more scripts, right? But the thing that you're going to want to keep in mind here is if you have an element, let's say here on the page, right? And you don't need the JavaScript to run for that element yet, like it hasn't been accessed or hasn't been used, what you can do is actually defer it so it gets loaded down here in the footer. And when you defer it, what happens is, say that's a 1 megabyte or 2 megabyte JavaScript file that has to be parsed and then render those results, your entire thread or the entire web page is going to be blocked during that time. So if you have a spinner or a loader or something like that, it's going to just keep going and going for that time. So it's always a good practice to make sure that you're only preloading and loading immediately things that you're going to need right away. So from there, we're going to end up having some custom post types. And what I'm going to put in here is the layout as a post type, right? So when we have that as a post type, what I can do is create a post or a page called header, maybe header 1, footer 1. And then because this is a custom post type, now when you're in the Gutenberg editor, you'll have your sidebar, you have your main area here, and there's going to be a couple more settings here. So I've added a custom element up here, and when that's selected, you'll have two options. You can select a header and a footer from that custom post type. So now what we'll be able to do is have a system where each page or each post, you have a layout option that is going to save some metadata, which is saying which header or which footer has been selected for that page. And then when that page is loaded, we're going to have a action that's called, or our hook that's called for the header, and it's going to query that post and find out what header has been attached to it and then display that header for us. So that's going to allow us to basically have a dynamic header and footer system using Gutenberg blocks some issues we're going to end up having to address here is with navigation, and luckily soon enough WordPress is going to be releasing a better system to deal with navigation. But currently there's not really a good block for that, and I don't want to start using third-party plugins just for this simple example. Anything we need, we are going to end up building out ourselves. So the one thing that we run into an issue with here is we've got our Gutenberg editor, and you know, this is going to be our header. So say we've got our logo here, and then we want a menu, right? So WordPress already has its own menu system, right? So we can create a menu called like header, right? And then we can give that children like a home, about, contact. So this system already exists, right? Right now there's just not a good way to implement the menus into Gutenberg as its own element. So what I'm gonna do is create a Gutenberg element that is going to act as a navigation. So to do that, you know, we're going to end up needing some kind of container, and then we're going to need to iterate through all the items that are in that menu and display them with some formatting, right? So each one of them will have an A, then the reference to its source, right? And then inside of that we'll have the actual text itself, right? And close that off. But now we can decide how we want to display this. You know, are we going to display it in a list in terms of like a vertical list, or we can display them like a text menu horizontally? So that would be something that we have to code into that element itself, so that there is a, you know, a switch or a toggle, so that we can say, you know, what's the display style, right? Or how should it be output? Then you have your two options, right? So we'd have horizontal or vertical. And then based on that selection, you know, our React or our Gutenberg element is going to re-render either into a horizontal or a vertical list. So that's something that we're going to have to code out and look into how WordPress handles its menus, and then query that data in and pull that into a component that we can reuse, and allow a user to simply select a series of posts or series of pages, or select a certain menu that is already pre-existing and use that to create this element. So that's one thing that we're definitely going to have to tackle there. Another thing is some common things that are used in the footer, or just stylistically in terms of the widgets, are not all available inside of Gutenberg. So when we decide what we want to do for the footer, we may have to create some custom functionality to accomplish that. But once again, the nice thing is we have now this, let's say this is header 1, and we've got this footer 1. Because they're just posts in the back end, when you go in and start making edits, or we add these new elements to them, it's gonna replicate and change everything, every instance of that footer on the website. The other thing is, now you could make a footer 2 just inside that layout and attach it to that page, and you're able to test and change things without having to make a global change to everything on your website. So nothing here is reinventing the wheel whatsoever. All these things already exist in most visual builders or visual editors. My goal here is to basically see what it's going to be like when everything becomes block-based in WordPress, and everything becomes based on these different components and pulling in the data through the methods that WordPress has exposed. Because most of this, as I said, we're going to end up getting these menu elements. They're coming. And there's a few other things that are coming as well. But I want to test it out, see how easy it is to implement something like this, and also to get a fully block-based theme implemented where the header, the footer, and any other elements are also going to be block based. The one thing, one limitation I'm putting on this is for the sidebar. I'm leaving the sidebar as a regular PHP or HTML element. I'm not going to integrate that into Gutenberg at this time, just to keep this a little bit shorter. I just want to focus on the main body area, which is really going to be your post or your page content, your footer, and then the header. So I think what I'm going to do now is move back over to the screen. So what we're going to start doing now is look at some of the scaffolding that I've set up. I've set up a basic theme that's going to allow us to start moving through some of the problems that we're going to have with setting this up. All that's been really set up is a really basic page, and I've set up the functions, I've set up the style sheets, I've set up a build process. So not all of these things are going to be needed in your case, but these are things that I want to do because it's part of my workflow, and it allows me to use newer features like ES6 and SCSS when I'm building out different web pages and building out different elements, and allows me to replicate my work a lot faster as well. So I'm just going to quickly start explaining a couple of things that I've got set up here. So if we go into the actual theme itself, what we've got set up is just a really simple page. This is where most everything is going to be taking place. We've got our get header here and our get footer, which is going to query our header page, which is even simpler. We've got our doc type set up at the top of the page, and then we've got a couple simple meta tags here, and we've got our WP head, which is going to pull in scripts and tags and all kinds of stuff from other plugins that are active on the website. We're going to move down, like I was saying, with the sidebar. We're going to keep that simple, and I've already got a sidebar that I've used on a bunch of other projects, and we're just going to allow that to do its thing, and it's going to use the custom logo that you set up in the customizer. And also it's going to output a sidebar menu that we define in the back end. So let's get back to just looking at the regular page here. You can see that there is a featured image that can be rendered on the page. I'm probably going to end up just removing this though, because what I really want is to have everything generated through your Gutenberg experience. So for a regular page or for a regular post, it's one of those things where, for the sake of what the project is, I'm going to remove the actual featured image and allow that to be something that is shown with Gutenberg. I think I'm going to do the same with the title as well, just because if I am going to allow this to be something that, you know, an editor or a marketer is going to be using, I don't want them to, if I tell them it's fully block based and, all the content you see in the back end is what you're going to see in the front end, and I've got things that are being output places that they don't know where it is, or, they're not exactly sure why that's happening. That's the last thing that I really want. I want it to be simple. What you see should be what you get in this case. So we're going to take those two things out of there. Also, I'm going to do the same thing on our index page. I guess for the index, I'm going to leave this as is, because there are some pages obviously that we are going to want to call the regular query or loop through some posts. Those are things that I have done in Gutenberg as well, but for simplicity, I think it's probably better if we keep it like that. What I could look into maybe for a future video is how we can create maybe a wrapper for those through Gutenberg, or something where I can like hot swap it in and out. Maybe part of that layout custom post type might be a list item, right? That could be something I can look into in the future and see if that's plausible or even worthwhile to do, versus, like I said, there's options where we can pull in all those posts and just display them on that page, and but then we're losing some of the functionality and features of WordPress. So let's keep taking a quick look through here. So for our header and our footer, I just want to show you what's going on here. For the footer, you can see we have this do action theme footer, and when it calls that action, I'm essentially just querying this piece of content right here. And what I'm doing is I'm going to get the footer ID, which is set on that current post ID, and we're going to get that post ID of the current post by using get the ID. We're going to then set the meta key, which is RCD layout footer, and then true, so that only returns a single result. The footer content, then we're going to apply the content filter from WordPress. What that is going to do is format our content the way that WordPress expects it, and especially when you're using Gutenberg elements, you really want to run it through the content filter. So to get the actual field, we're going to get that post content field by using get post field and then passing it the footer ID, and then we can echo out our footer content. So that's everything we're doing to display our footer. So that's really it. We're doing the exact same thing with our header. It's basically the exact same code, except that it's the header ID instead, and it's the header content, and then we have a different meta key. So that's what's rendering our pages right now: our header, our main body, our footer, and then, as I mentioned, the sidebar is being rendered a little bit differently. So when we look at our header and look at basically how our page is going to start, we have our doc type, we have our HTML attributes, our head, our body, which I wrap in an app ID, and then we have our get sidebar. So I'm using Semantic UI, the community version actually Fomantic UI, and it's a CSS framework similar to like a Bootstrap or a Foundation or a Tailwind or any of these other CSS frameworks that are out there. I really like it because it's a little bit different than most of the popular ones that are out there. It's well supported, gives you a lot of different elements and components, and I don't feel like I have to reinvent the wheel to do anything, and it feels very slick. So while we're building out the UI, you're going to be seeing me use certain codes like a UI container or UI card or UI image, and the UI is a class identifier for that framework, just signifying that I'm using one of those elements. I'm also going to be using the grids from there, and the sections and containers and a couple of the other elements, and that's something, if people are interested in, we can go through in another video about that whole framework and how to use it and how to get the most out of it. I've had a lot of success with it, and I think it's great overall. So that's what I'm going to be using today, and that's why there are going to be certain semantic things which maybe some of you might be confused with, but wanted to explain that because that's why we have this pusher here. So the pusher basically is a element from Semantic UI or Fomantic, which is allowing the main body content of the page to sit in your main window, and then when you have your sidebar on the side or the top, wherever you want to put it, it'll allow the body content to be pushed out of the way without affecting how it's displayed. So that's one of the reasons I like using it. It makes it really simple to add a sidebar on. They have some great things for their visibility and their API overall. So the next thing I want to get into is showing you the build process that I have set up here. I could go just run through this and start doing the actual building of everything out, implementing things and just running through the code, but my goal really is to show people the full process, some of the thought process, how things work, and just to also help anyone who is like me and is just curious about how these things work and want to learn how to develop and make great things. Make something from nothing is always the way that I look at it. So I'm just gonna run through how I'm building everything. If you want to fast forward, you can go ahead, but it's going to help anyone who's maybe getting started and they see some of these folders or some of these extensions or things that they're not familiar with or not sure, and think that they can't do this or can't accomplish what I have laid out here. So what I'm going to do is quickly just show you what's set up in the source folder. So for this project, I have my primary project folder, and it's going to have some configuration files in here. There's nothing crazy going on. These configuration files are just for Parcel. Parcel is a bundler, so what it's going to do is take all my pieces of JavaScript and CSS and all the frameworks and bundles and modules that they're using, and repackage that, minify the code. Also, with this browser list RC, for example, it'll make sure that whatever ES version that I'm using at the time, or if I'm using older JavaScript conventions, it'll help to make sure that if you're trying to use newer JavaScript conventions, it'll make it backwards compatible for previous versions. So that's what these things are here. Post CSS is doing something similar here, where it's going to basically go through all the CSS and make sure that you're doing prefixing and post prefix. You're doing all your prefixing, for example, WebKit, or for Mozilla, or for Opera browser. Just because you write your CSS doesn't mean that CSS is going to be accepted by every single browser in the same way. So we do still have vendor prefixes, not as popular as they once were, not as required as they once were, but having something like this makes it easy to be totally compliant with that stuff without having to go off, spend 10-15 hours making sure everything's prefixed the right way and checking things in every browser. You should still do that, but it definitely helps to know that you have an automated part of your process that's doing that for you. So in SassRC, all that's doing is making sure that I can pull in things from node modules. So if I have a CSS file I want to pull in from a node module, I'm able to do that through here. So let's take a look at the actual source folder itself. And what's in here is all the sources that I'm going to use to build the theme itself. I don't put the stuff for the plugins in here. This is just for the theme. So in our theme, we're going to end up having likely JavaScript files. So I have ES6 as a folder here. Right now we don't have anything in that front end JavaScript file. We don't need anything there at the moment. So that's just empty as a placeholder. We have our SCSS, which is a CSS preprocessor, which is going to allow us to write code in a way where we have to do less duplication. We have to do a lot less writing in general, and it allows us to structure our CSS code in a similar, the way I look at it is in a similar way that we structure our HTML, the same way that we have these hierarchies and parent-child structures. So if you just take a look at this, it allows us to import in our WP theme and a mixins file. So in our WP theme, I'm using this to import our comment that we're going to need to actually install a valid theme on WordPress. And you can see all the information that's set up in here. And importantly is your text domain as well, because when you're building out a theme, you got to make sure that, especially if you are going to publish that or give it to other people and you don't know their use case, it allows for internationalization or localization. So what you can do is you can, when you're echoing or outputting text or saving that text, what you can do is have an identifier and then also use your text domain to create a translatable file, which will allow you to match up these IDs with new strings, for example. So if you wanted to have a new translation to a different language, someone would be able to go in and, based on all these different IDs and different areas that you've marked off in your code, they will be able to add a different string to translate that specific thing. So it's an important thing to make sure you know you have your text domain set up and you know what it is, because you're going to be using it all throughout your theme, and unfortunately it's one of those things you actually can't set as a variable and just reuse. So knowing what it is, making sure you've got the right one, and making sure that when you do use it, you're using it exactly and perfectly is really important. So the last thing I'm going to go through here is I like to set up a extra CSS file that has all the color mods that are default for WordPress, because when you start getting into the theme supports, they allow you to set your own custom colors, but the second you do that, you lose all the other colors in the palette. So if you like the default WordPress palette but you want to add your own custom colors, it's something that you have to be aware of. At least I don't know of a way right now to just add on your own colors. So what I've been doing, I have a root I have it set up to the root, where then I'm going through all the colors that they have. There's a background and a text for all of them, and just setting all of those up. And then when I add my new ones, I just go in and add my own background, my own text ones, and then I get the full editor palette with all the default WordPress colors as well. So one more thing is to add an editor CSS file. So with Gutenberg, the size of that editor is really small. It's designed for doing, writing posts, right? They want it to have an experience more centered on writing, and making a less cluttered experience, a more zen experience for someone who's doing writing. So that's an inherent issue when we are trying to allow that Gutenberg block or that Gutenberg editor area to create a full width wide display full width display header or footer, right, or some other element that we want to kind of see in its entirety. And of course, you have the alignment options, like you can change it to align width and align full, but for my purposes, I just wanted to stretch it out a little bit so that when I'm seeing that header, when I'm seeing that footer, it's easier to visualize what it's going to be when I move it over to the actual website, or when I refresh the site and re-render it, how it's going to look, instead of it being squashed up or trying to align wide, and then you have other CSS that's maybe interfering with what you're trying to accomplish. So the next thing I want to go into is the actual theme itself now. So in the theme, we're going to just take a look at the functions file. So this function file is set up in a way where we're going to just be including all the different files that we end up needing. There's some boilerplate stuff in here, but I like to set it up in this way, and then as I'm adding new code, I can make sure that it's structured, right? So I've put all my actions in an actions file, I put all the filters in a filters file, I put all the supports in a supports, and that's been the biggest help for me as someone who does it independently. You think you can just keep adding to that functions file and just keep writing, and then before you know it, you're 4,000, 6,000, 10,000 lines deep into one file, and then you're searching and finding for hours and hours and hours just to try and get something done or figure out where all these things are connected. So a big thing for my workflow has definitely been breaking out different aspects of WordPress into different folders and files, and then really just trying to compartmentalize that different problem, and then I found it's been a lot easier to figure out how to connect all these different things together, rather than trying to scroll up and down one big long page and peek at a definition and then go back here, and it just allows your brain to do the compartmentalizing it needs to sometimes to be able to accomplish complex tasks without losing your mind in the process. So that's what this page is, and you'll see as we go through this process there might be some REST calls that we end up having to make that navigation work. For example, let's say there might be some new actions or filters that we add. If we get into the customizer, then I'll be doing I'll enable it through here, and then we'll write code in that page. This is a little bit funky, I know, but this is something I use to when I'm making a lot of themes. You need to do prefixing, and this is something I use to make sure that all my functions are prefixed and I'm not going to run into any crazy issues. And I always use long strings to, not necessarily just long, but I try to be descriptive with those strings, because then you're less likely to run into collisions as well, because when everyone's using shorthands, you only have so many things you can come out of with that, right? So this is a theme prefix, and it gets applied to all the functions that are going to be run, and it allows me to just keep iterating through, and then when any of these if I come out with something at the end that's got all the features and functions and everything that I like from it, I can copy out the whole theme, paste it into a new folder basically, or do a git and clone it, and then I can change my prefix, or I can even start hard coding that prefix in everywhere. So it allows me to just kind of pick up and go and not worry about missing a whole bunch of prefixes all over the place and doing a search and replace for maybe thousands of matches. So quickly, we're going to take a look at this helpers that I have set up. So helpers just going to allow us to use a couple functions. I'm just going to go through this because if we end up using any of these to maybe do some debugging, I don't want anyone to get lost or crash their server because they tried to do a console_log and everything blew up. So we've also got the print to log file in ThemeDir. So what that is it's a function I've set up so that, say I want to log something out somewhere that you can't output to a page, that'll usually cause an error or cause you some other issues. So what I can do is print a log out to a file in the theme directory. So say you have 10 different themes installed on a website, and you're testing this specific one, it'll go into that themes directory itself, and we can rename or change the name of that file, and it'll also include some other information about it as well, and allow us to do different file types like text or JSON or different objects or arrays, and also overwrite the file or extend it. So it's something that I use to help me do some debugging, help me do some testing, and allows me to save some data out somewhere else outside of function. Outside of just printing it to a page, and it also allows me to see like a chronological order of the different functions or hooks or actions or parameters as they're executed, because I'll see each one that pops out into that log. So those are two things that I like to use on all my projects to make sure that I have an extra way to just log things out. Of course, you can use WP logging as well, but I like to use this as I can use it in any PHP project. There's a couple other helpers that I also include in here that I just use personally to either get some images, or get some IDs, get attachments, or do some URL encoding. They're just other helpers that I generally have inside of my theme. I don't always use all of them, and if I don't, I'll end up taking them out, but I just always include them because they're functions that I end up using pretty often. So having them set up and included in that helpers file allows you to, like I said, be a little bit more portable, and you can just kind of pick up and go in every new project you do. I'd be sparse with it, but you could add new helpers that you use on a regular basis and keep moving that forward, and then it just decreases your development time moving forward. So let's take a quick look at the HTTP folder inside the includes. Right now we're only using the assets so far, so you'll see that we're enqueuing our style sheets. So we have our first one, which is our style. It's going to be our main actual style sheet. This is what's output here. We have our semantic UI style, which is, like I said, that's our CSS framework. We're building that and pushing that into its own folder as well. So you'll see that there's a so you'll see that we still have to output that folder here. Sorry, it's here under SUI. So you'll see we have our semantic and our semantic CSS we have our semantic JS and our semantic CSS that's under our SUI and our themes. So that's just when we're bundling semantic UI using the gulp builder that's included, it gets outputted into this SUI folder inside the theme, and then that way we've got everything related to semantic UI all in one place, and it keeps us from having to do like another source folder or something inside the theme. We can just do CSS, JS, and because we're using the one framework, we have the SUI one. So the next thing we're going to look at inside the assets is which scripts we're going to enqueue. So these are JavaScript. So we've got our semantic UI, it's our framework again, and just the regular script. It's a placeholder for now, there's nothing there. But the important thing to know when you're doing your onqueuing is to make sure that you have any dependencies set up correctly. Most of the time, if you're including JavaScript, you're going to be including jQuery, but you want to make sure that loads first. So it's one of the strings you want to include in there. The JavaScript that I'd be running, I'm going to want to make sure that my whatever JavaScript in the CSS framework is already included, so that I can manipulate that and use that for my own code as well. And the last thing we have here is the editor style sheet. So this is the editor sheet I was showing you before, with the one change in it just being that the block size has been doubled from 610 pixels wide as a max to a max width of 1220 pixels. So that's what's going on in the assets folder. We're going to go into the setup and then the supports. And then support, you can see we've set up our time zone. We've also got the add theme support for our custom logo, which allow you to add favicon in your logo. And I think one more thing as well in the customizer, this is a title tag attribute. These are basically these are all your different theme supports. So this is going to add the title meta tag and just do some extra formatting for it. Post thumbnails as an option. We have our add theme support, HTML5, search form, comment list. All the ones I've gone through so far are pretty standard. WP block styles is going to give you the styles of these blocks that you're using in Gutenberg. Responsive embeds will help you to get responsive iframes for YouTube or different embeds that you're doing. Align wide gives you an additional layout option for all your Gutenberg elements. When you click that, it'll say align wide and full width and a couple other options. The editor font sizes is exactly what it sounds like, and it allows you to set a couple different specific font sizes that allows your editors or anyone who's doing the admin side to have a way to pick between those outside of just your header sizes, right? So this gives you some paragraph, some variation to the size of the text in your paragraphs. You can see we've added the support for the editor style. If you don't add this line, you won't be able to actually add that editor CSS. The add theme support, this is, I went over this before talking about in the root why I include all the different default colors from WordPress. And this is why right here, because I redeclare the add theme support. This is a terrible example right now, but usually what you'd be doing is, you'd have more colors that you're actually adding on to here. So it might be my RCD pink and or RCD pale pink, and instead of an 8, this is a 1, right? And now we've got a different slug here, and what we'd be able to do is go into our SCSS, and inside of the editor, or it's inside of the extra CSS, what we can do now is we could have a new one here that says RCD pale pink background, and then also pale pink color. Right, of course we still have to make whatever change we made to it. I think this was a 1 instead. But now when you save that out and you if you add that to your theme support and then you add that color to any of your Gutenberg elements, you have this CSS here, and those classes are added to them depending on if it's a background or the text color that's being changed. And that's all you have to do to add a new color to the editor palette without losing all those old colors. So because I haven't decided on any specific branded colors for this one yet, we're just going to take that out and leave it as it was. We're going to do the same thing here with the add theme support. We're just going to remove this line that we added, and that's it for the support section. So the next one I'm going to quickly take a look at here with you is the theme post types. So what we're going to want to do is we're creating a custom post type really for the layouts. So it's called RCD layout. In the menu you're going to see RCD layouts, and then singular is RCD layout. So this is how you set up your labels here. There's a ton more options that you can go into for your custom when you're registering your custom post type. There's a couple things that we need to have set up properly. We have to make sure we have the show and rest here, because there's going to be some rest calls that are made for the Gutenberg elements. We want title, editor, custom fields, and then also I just leave the revisions there. It's not the worst thing to have. If you make a mistake, you can get the draft back. Use a lot of space in your database, but if you're not limited by that, I would keep them on. I haven't decided yet, but I may come back and set this up to use categories or tags, and then that way what we can do is have a specific header category inside the layout, and then all the headers would have that category or that tag. But for now, we're just going to keep it simple because we're only going to have a couple options, and we're naming them with the prefix of header or footer, so it's easy to identify. But if you were going to release this out to a bunch of people or the general public, I would definitely have it set up in a way where that's not how you have to go about it, that you could just set up a category or a tag, and then what we can do is when we're querying those posts, we can also make sure that we're only getting the headers when we want a header and a footer when we want a footer. So we're gonna not worry about that right now and just keep moving forward. But it's something to keep in mind definitely down the road if we start to flesh out some of those features and want to turn it into more of a theme that can be shared or used by anyone without them having to get into the meat and potatoes of everything here. So these are our template rendering functions. So when we're doing the do action for the theme header or the do action for the theme footer, these are the actions that are being called. And as I was mentioning, they're just simply going to call that footer bar and the header bar. So you can see under, let's close these up. Under our UI, we have our footer bar, footer head. Sorry, header bar and footer bar. And from those header and footer bars, from those theme header and theme footer action calls, we are just grabbing that template part for the header bar or for the footer bar. And inside of each of those, what we're doing is grabbing the ID of the footer or the header and getting the content, running it through the filter, and then echoing it out to the page. So that's really how everything is being set up currently. Some old info. So that's what we have set up currently. We've got our thumbnails in here. I like to just add my own custom thumbnail sizes for full. This just makes sure that, if you have a thumbnail, usually they're cropped on both sides. Generally, I like to at least have my full height, and then if it's wider, that's fine. But that's what these are set up here. So if you had other image sizes that you wanted to add, you can do an add image size. You give it a name, specify the width, the height and the width, and then you can basically add that to your after setup theme, and it gives you more options. Say you're using something like EW image optimizer, EWWW image optimizer. That one will then take in all these different sizes and re-crop and resize all of them to those different aspect ratios and different sizes, and it just gives you more options, especially for things like listings or for items that are coming out or in your sidebars. Especially when we're going to be doing things with the header and making our own custom elements, we're going to want a little bit more control over the sizes, and just having the couple regular ones aren't always going to be exactly what we're looking for. So now that we've gone through everything on the code aspect, I just want to show you what's actually set up on the front end. It's nothing pretty, and that's not the goal, to make anything pretty right now. This is just to make sure that we could do a very simple proof of concept and make sure that what we want to get working is possible to get working. And let's just quickly take a look and see how that's been accomplished so far. So what I've done is I've installed WordPress. We're on 5.3.2. Removed the 2020 theme. I just created that theme that you just saw there. Just very, very bare bones. And then the rest of the content is coming through Gutenberg. So I'm going to show you quickly what's going on in the back end. We can see on this sample page, it's the default sample page from WordPress. We've got the title of the page and then the body content, right? So we've got this main area here. So let me just quickly update our theme here. I think there were a couple changes that I made that I didn't update. So let's make sure everything's all up to date, because I'm pretty sure I removed this title. So the title won't be there anymore. So the other thing is, I'm going to quickly show you, this is the sidebar. So I'm going to run through the code for that in a second, but this is for the layout now. You'll see this icon here. And when you select that icon, you'll see layout, and then select a header, select a footer, and then we just have header 1 and footer 1 that's in here currently. So I'm going to leave those selected, and what we're going to do is move over to the RCD layouts. That's the custom post type that we made earlier. And inside of that custom post type, you can see we have two posts. One's header 1 and the other is footer 1. So in header 1, you can see we have our I've just added a couple groups, because we want one outer group that's going to be available in case we want to do a background, right? So if I wanted to do a background color on this whole element, let's say, but also I want to have a inner group, right? So I want that background, but I have this inner group. I gotta do the hierarchy. What's going on here? Okay, yeah, so that's my fault. I gotta add one more group here so that we can, because basically what we want is, you know, the full width block that's gonna be behind it, and then we're gonna want one that we can contain inside of that space, right? So we're gonna have our group that's on the outside and use that to set background colors or do some spacing, and then we're gonna have the one on the inside that's grouping all the content itself together, and that one we're going to apply a container to so that that's not spilling too far out, or, you know, vice versa. So what we need to do then is just add another group. Just going to add another group down here, grab this and drag it inside of that, right? And now you can see we can add this background color, but also we'll have this group on the inside, and UI container is the class that I want to add to it. So how semantic UI works is very similar to like Bootstrap and a lot of the other systems. There's grids and then there's containers, and basically a container is a set width that it's going to allow your content to flow to. So we have a text container, which is small, a normal UI container, and then a fluid container. So you might see me use those throughout here, and what that is just basically giving a limit to that block on the width that it can go, and it aligns it to the center. So that's what the UI container is, and that's why we want to have them separate, because if I apply, you know, the UI container, you know, to the entire element, then we have all this space on the sides that we can't really access or do anything with. So giving it the outer group and then having an inner group that's holding the content is going to allow us to be able to control both. So now that we've got that going on, let's just do a quick update. Everything's still attached to this page, it's still attached to that same header. So we should be able to just do a quick update, and you can see now we've got our new Gutenberg header. We've changed it and updated it with a new style. So let's go back here. You know, one of the things we might have to work on is, like I said, there's no navigation block right now. You know, I wouldn't be surprised. There's probably third-party ones. You could probably go into the plugins and download one in 30 seconds. But I know one is natively coming to WordPress. So what I would prefer to do is, you know, it's partially an exercise as well, is just create my own, right? So I already have some functions that will take in a menu, a WordPress menu, and do some things to it to output a menu, right, as we would see it. So either a series of the menu items horizontally or a list of them vertically, and then maybe I can give it some setting. I could give it settings to vary its style, right? So if there's a background, if there's buttons, and the actual display and output of all of that. So I'm gonna try to keep that simple, but give it enough flexibility that, you know, it can integrate into one of these other elements and have its own sense of style and not look off-putting. So right now what I'm doing is I've just got a table set up here. So this is a really rough and tumble way of doing it, but you could, you know, go in here and actually just link every single one of these and call it a day if you wanted to, but it really doesn't look that good, and it's not going to function that well, and it's not hooked up to any of your other data, so you're going to end up just running into a ton of issues with that. But as we're building things out, I did want to leave a placeholder here just so that we can see where that menu will go. When I build out the component for that, we'll just replace this with that new component, and we'll go through there. So the other one I wanted you to take a quick look at is just the footer. If we look at our footer here, you can see I'm doing the same sort of thing, right? We've got a outside group that is encapsulating a inner group that is holding in all of our contents. So we're using a spacer here at the top and at the bottom to just give this element a little bit more breathing room, so that, you know, this image and this calendar aren't bumping right up against the bottom of our content. So I just threw these in here for the time being. These are the widgets. So this is the calendar widget. So if I was to go in here, we can go into widgets and you'll see calendar, and that's what's here. And the same thing with the archives. Is this archives group here. So not a fan of how any of that's looking right now, but you know, this stuff's still new. They're going to be coming out with more and more widgets and moving things over. The nice thing is you can use shortcodes as well. So if you've built anything into a shortcode, so you can just add that shortcode, and what you can do is write in that whatever the shortcode is there. So it's like a contact form or some other element that's part of a framework or whatever the case is. You can use that shortcode and just add it right into that box, and it'll display it as such. On the front end. Some of them don't display in the back end, but in the front end you will see what you're expecting to see in that area. Got another thing down here, same kind of idea. We've got a group that's inside of a group that is then just providing its own styling. So this is just a paragraph Gutenberg element that is centered right now. So, you know, definitely some disadvantages with that, because this 2020 is not going to auto update on its own, which is, you know, it's not a big deal, but it's something that we're all used to, right? So you're definitely gonna have to make certain concessions with a style like this. But like I said, because it is just a post, if you make a new one, you make a new version, you know, say we just want to go with a new style, you want to go like black, and then have a, let's say we just want to throw like our logo on one side. I'm just going to basically rebuild what we had before, just a little bit different. So I'm going to just reload this with a inverted version now. On the right hand side, we will just put a list. See, and this is where one of those things where, you know, not every single element has as many options as the other ones. So you'll see with this list one, we're not getting anything to, you know, really modify its color. But what we could do is add a CSS class here and call it inverted list. So I'm just going to actually do that and add a new CSS class when we're done adding this list here. So we could say maybe these are a couple links, right? So we've got our inverted list there. Let's just add some CSS to make that show up for us. So I'm just going to add it into the style. What we want to do here is, it's called inverted list. And first thing we're going to do is just make sure that this is all showing up. So yeah, while that builds, what we're going to do is get that prepped to move over to the main site. So that one's ready to go. And let's just upload that, save this out. So now what we want to do is we're going to need to select a different footer for this page. So to display that one, let's select our new footer. Just call it footer. I should call it footer 2. But that's fine. And now we should be able to reload. Boom, we've got our inverted list and we've got our super large overbearing logo going on right here. But just like that, we're able to very quickly have a completely different footer. We didn't have to do any code, we didn't have to do really anything but make a new post and just style it with a couple things in mind for that footer. So let's make a couple of the adjustments that I've made on the other ones. So the first thing we're going to want to do is let's just add that other group, right? Because I forgot to do that. So we'll do UI container, and then we're going to just move this into this new group here, and on the external group is where we're going to switch that color over, right? So we can there is an editor script that you can modify and give it CSS, which will show in Gutenberg and on the front end. So I'll probably be updating that before this is all finished, but like I said, I'm just trying to, for brevity right now, just go through and make sure that I'm going over the basics and just giving you an example of how this stuff can be used, right? Because, WordPress is definitely going to release their own, version of how all this stuff should be done and new elements, and they really want to push this forward. So I don't see, it's not like this is a required thing right now to go through and figure all of this out and get it all to work and go through the ringer in terms of, the hurdles and stumbling blocks related to doing something like this. But for me, I think it's just a good experience, and it's a good way to see what's going to be upcoming and how to work with it, what some of the limitations are potentially going to be. And also how to make these new systems work for me, right, instead of the other way around. So I'm just going to get back out of this one. We're going to reset footer 1 as the footer on this. Close these out, refresh the page. Okay, cool. So the next steps are going to be to create a Gutenberg element for the menu, and then we're going to design out the footer and determine how we want to, what we want to put in the footer and how we're going to set that all up, and what Gutenberg elements that we're going to need to use to accomplish that.